I never imagined a single piece of trash could shake my entire world. Just last weekend, Elena and I were joking about how perfect our life seemed. A week ago, I'd have said Elena, my wife, and I were the most stable couple around. We've been together since college. She studied law, I did marketing. After 6 years of marriage, we had our daughter, Sophie, now 2. Life felt secure and happy. Then, during a routine cleanup in our Westbridge vacation apartment, I discovered an empty condom wrapper at the bottom of the kitchen trash bin. My in-laws, Matthew and Christine, own a respected law firm. Elena joined them right after passing the bar on her first try. As a congratulatory gesture, they gave her a furnished apartment in Westbridge. We call it our vacation spot, though it's also perfect for late work nights. Lately I've used it too because of the relentless noise from our neighbor's renovation back home. Sophie's naps were suffering, and I needed a quiet space to focus on my projects. That's how I ended up cleaning the apartment and finding the wrapper. At first I froze. Elena and I don't use condoms, so the wrapper felt wildly out of place. Did someone else stay here? Usually, we inform each other about guests. My mind churned with possibilities I'd never faced before. Could it point to Elena? Or was a family member using our place? I tried to stay calm, but my heart thundered in my chest. Even though I wanted a reasonable explanation, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling creeping into my thoughts. That evening, I showed Elena the wrapper, bracing myself for her reaction. She glanced at it with mild curiosity, not horror or confusion. She simply said she had no clue how it got there. Then she mentioned her sister, Sandra, might be responsible. According to Elena, Sandra crashed there during a recent blizzard and could have had company. The explanation sounded plausible, especially since Sandra's been seeing someone new. I wanted to breathe a sigh of relief, but Elena's casual tone felt strange. I expected more concern, or at least surprise. Sandra, and I have a good rapport, so I couldn't imagine her lying if she had used our place for a private night. Still, Elena insisted Sandra's shyness might make her keep it secret. I found myself half convinced. Maybe this was nothing, just an awkward situation. Yet Elena's calm unsettled me. Was she genuinely unbothered, or was she shutting down deeper questions? My stomach churned with doubt. After all, we never had any trust issues before, and I wasn't sure how to handle the possibility that this wrapper hinted at something worse. Over the next few days, Elena acted like it was forgotten. She'd head to work, come home, and hardly mention anything beyond the usual talk about Sophie or dinner. I tried to do the same, but every so often my gaze would drift to the trash bin. I found myself wondering if I was naive. Could Elena be covering up her own slip? I felt guilty for even thinking it. Our marriage always thrived on honesty. Why would she throw that away over a pointless fling? Yet the doubt persisted. The weekend rolled around, and Sandra visited for a family dinner. While Elena was busy in the kitchen, I casually asked Sandra about her night in Westbridge. She mentioned the blizzard but claimed she spent the evening alone. My heart lurched. That directly contradicted Elena's suggestion that Sandra might have had a guest. The tension in me climbed as Sandra innocently changed the subject to a TV show she'd been binge-watching. Clearly, she wasn't hiding a secret boyfriend. I felt stuck, unsure if I should confront Sandra more directly, or wait. After dinner, I told Elena about my conversation. She shrugged and said Sandra was likely lying from embarrassment. When I questioned that logic, she snapped, accusing me of making a big deal out of nothing. That defensiveness felt jarring. In all our years, Elena rarely snapped at me without cause. I tried to keep calm, reminding myself she could be overworked. But as she turned away, I sensed a widening gap. I began to question everything, our daily routine, her late nights, and the trust I once thought was unbreakable. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I watched Elena doze off, her breathing steady and calm. I remembered how she'd always been vocal about her hatred of infidelity, stemming from her father's past affairs. She once told me she would never betray someone she loved. I believed her wholeheartedly. But now, with a single condom wrapper, all that certainty was in question. Was I on the verge of uncovering something awful, or was I letting paranoia poison my perspective? I felt trapped in my own anxious thoughts. I wanted to trust her, but I also wanted clarity. That wrapper loomed large in my imagination, representing an unraveling of the life we'd built. As I stared into the dark, I realized I had to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Something inside me whispered that this was just the start of a deeper rift, and so I decided I wouldn't let it go. I needed answers. Little did I know just how tangled this situation would become, or how far it would push me. In the days following my discovery, I found myself tiptoeing around Elena. I hated the feeling, as if I were an intruder in my own marriage. I tried to be casual, but my mind kept drifting to the vacant stares Elena gave me whenever I mentioned the condom wrapper. She was polite, but I sensed a guarded edge. Every conversation felt like a tightrope walk, where one wrong question could spark an argument. I missed the easy warmth we once shared. I couldn't ignore the unease that gnawed at me, demanding answers I still didn't have. One afternoon, I decided to talk with my closest friend, Neil. We'd gone to college together, and he'd met Elena back in our freshman year. I told him everything, from the condom wrapper to Elena's evasive behavior. Neil listened quietly, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he sighed. "Look, man, I know you love Elena, but you can't let this slide without solid answers. If it's just a misunderstanding, fine. But what if it isn't?" His words echoed what I was already thinking but didn't want to admit. I decided to approach Sandra directly, without Elena's presence. A few days later, I invited her for coffee. I tried to keep the conversation light at first, asked about work, her new beau, typical small talk. Then I steered it toward the apartment. "You said you stayed alone, right?" She nodded, looking puzzled. I told her about the condom wrapper, and how Elena suggested it might have been hers. Sandra seemed shocked. She swore up and down that she'd never had company there. I believed her. She looked genuinely confused by the accusation. Leaving the cafe, my mind raced. If Sandra was telling the truth, then Elena had lied about her sister having a guest. But why? The simplest explanation was that Elena was covering up something else, something she didn't want me to know. My stomach churned at the implications. That evening I tried to confront Elena again, but she brushed me off, saying she was exhausted from a tough day at the firm. We ended up in a tense silence, both of us aware we were tiptoeing around something much bigger. I started noticing little things that fueled my paranoia. Elena's phone suddenly seemed glued to her hand, and she'd take it everywhere, even into the bathroom. She began returning home later than usual, claiming heavy workloads. Her explanations were plausible, but I couldn't help seeing them as potential lies. One night I checked her phone bill online. I'd never done that before. I always trusted her. There were a few calls to a number I didn't recognize, scattered late at night. My heart pounded as I considered what that might mean. Feeling desperate, I memorized the unknown number and decided to call it from my own phone. A man answered. My pulse thundered as I asked if he knew someone named Elena. He paused before replying, "No, sorry," and hung up. The abruptness of his reaction didn't ease my tension. It could have been the wrong number, but it could also be someone lying. I felt a surge of guilt for playing detective, but I was in too deep to stop. I needed certainty, no matter the emotional cost. That night, I barely slept. Meanwhile, Elena's mother, Christine, decided to host a weekend brunch to catch up with everyone. We gathered at their family estate, a sprawling property they'd owned for decades. Sandra was there, as were Elena's parents. Throughout the meal, I watched Elena closely. She avoided my gaze whenever I tried to make eye contact. Sandra seemed uneasy too, casting sideways glances. Matthew, my father-in-law, was jovial, regaling us with stories. I found myself wondering how many secrets had been hidden behind these polished walls over the years. Sophie toddled around happily, oblivious to the tension thickening the air. After brunch, Christine pulled me aside. She said she noticed tension between Elena and me. I hesitated, but Christine had a gentle way of prying that made me spill bits of the story, mentioning the wrapper and how Elena's explanations weren't adding up. She frowned, her concern palpable. "You know Matthew had indiscretions in the past," she said softly. "Elena hated that secrecy. If she's hiding something from you now, it must be tearing her apart." Those words echoed in my head, amplifying my confusion. I felt torn between pity and suspicion. When we got home, I finally mustered the courage to ask Elena directly about her phone calls. She tensed up, demanding to know why I was snooping. I stammered through an explanation, saying I was worried about us. She insisted the calls were work-related, citing a potential new client. I asked why the man denied knowing her. She snapped that not everyone wants to discuss legal matters with a stranger. The argument escalated, leaving me feeling more isolated. At that moment, I felt like we were on the brink of collapse. Late that night, I heard Elena crying in the bathroom. I wanted to comfort her, but I also felt anger simmering. This wedge of suspicion was tearing us apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. As she emerged, eyes red, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I hate what this is doing to us. I asked her to tell me the truth, whatever it might be. She looked away, tears brimming, and said, I can't. Not yet. My heart sank. I realized I was more entangled than ever with no clear way forward. Elena's cryptic words haunted me for days. I can't. Not yet. Did that imply she would tell me eventually? Or was she stalling, hoping I'd stop asking? I wrestled with these questions while going through the motions of daily life. Taking Sophie to daycare, churning out half-hearted work emails, and forcing myself to smile when Elena and I were in the same room. It all felt surreal. My head buzzed with theories. Maybe she was protecting someone, or maybe the truth was uglier than I could handle. I decided I needed an objective opinion, so I booked an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Morgan specialized in marital issues and had come highly recommended. I felt strange pouring my suspicions onto a stranger, but I was desperate. I explained how Elena and I had always been honest with each other, until now. I recounted finding the condom wrapper, Elena's strange story about Sandra, and the phone calls to an unknown man. Dr. Morgan listened intently, jotting down notes. Sometimes, she said gently, people hide things because they're afraid of how much damage honesty will do. It doesn't always mean infidelity. Could be a financial issue, a personal crisis, or even something related to her family. Have you considered asking open-ended questions instead of confronting her with direct accusations? Her words struck a chord. I'd been so fixated on the possibility of an affair that I hadn't paused to consider other explanations. Still, the condom wrapper was tough to dismiss. I thanked Dr. Morgan, leaving the session with a swirl of complicated emotions. I was determined to find a better approach to speaking with Elena. That night, I tried to open a calmer conversation. After Sophie was asleep, I sat Elena down at the kitchen table and spoke softly. Look, I'm not trying to accuse you of anything. I just need to understand why there's a condom wrapper in our apartment, and why you keep shutting down when I ask about it. I paused, inhaling slowly. If it's not an affair, then please help me figure out what's really going on. Elena lowered her gaze. She fidgeted with her wedding band, twisting it around her finger. I promise you, I'm not cheating, she said. My heart clenched with both relief and skepticism. I wanted to believe her so badly. She leaned forward, her voice trembling. But there's something else. Something I'm trying to fix on my own. I just need more time. Please trust me. I wanted to press her for details right then and there, but Dr. Morgan's advice echoed in my mind. Instead, I nodded slowly and reached for her hand. Okay, I whispered, though doubt still gnawed at me. I'll give you space, but please remember I'm here, and I'd rather help than stand on the sidelines. For a few days, the tension between us seemed to ease. Elena came home a bit earlier, and we spent more time together as a family. We even managed to share a few laughs while watching a silly cartoon with Sophie. I began to hope that maybe the worst was behind us. The mystery of the condom wrapper still lingered, but I tried to cling to Elena's promise that she wasn't cheating. Then, out of the blue, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. We need to talk. Meet me at the Greenleaf Cafe, tomorrow at noon. My stomach twisted when I saw it. Was this related to the mysterious calls? Was it the same man? I felt a pulse of dread and curiosity. After some hesitation, I texted back, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "I'll explain in person." Unable to focus on work the next morning, I showed up at the Greenleaf Cafe early. I ordered a coffee and sat in a corner booth, scanning every face that walked through the door. My palms were sweaty, my heart beating so loudly I could feel it in my temples. At exactly noon, the man from the phone, at least I assumed it was him, walked in. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed in a neat blazer. He spotted me right away, and approached. "I'm James," he said, sliding into the seat opposite me. His voice was low. I recognized it from our brief call. "Listen, I don't want any trouble, but I think we have a misunderstanding." I swallowed hard, waiting for him to continue. He glanced around, almost paranoid someone might overhear us. "Elena's been helping me with a sensitive legal case. She told me her husband was suspicious because of the phone calls. I'm sorry if I caused you any grief." I narrowed my eyes. "A legal case?" He nodded, explaining it involved a high-profile client at the law firm. He claimed confidentiality prevented him from disclosing details. According to him, Elena had asked him to deny knowing her if anyone else called, to protect privileged information. My head spun. Could it be that innocent? If so, why the condom wrapper? And why Elena's lie about Sandra? As if reading my thoughts, James sighed. Look, I have no clue about any condom. Elena just said you found something that made you suspicious. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a business card. Here's my number, my real name, everything. If you need to confirm I'm not some affair partner, feel free to run a background check. I owe Elena, and I don't want to jeopardize her job. I stared at the card, reading James Holloway, investigator printed in neat lettering. It looked legitimate. My mind reeled. If Elena was simply protecting a client, why hide it so poorly and let me jump to the worst conclusion? And what about that rapper? None of this explained the mismatch with Sandra's story. After James left, I walked home in a daze. If his words were true, then part of this puzzle was solved. Elena wasn't calling a secret lover, but an investigator assisting with a high-stakes legal matter. Yet the bigger question remained. Who was responsible for the condom wrapper? And why did Elena lie about Sandra? That evening I told Elena I'd met James. Her reaction was a mix of shock and relief, but she quickly shifted into frustration. That was confidential, she hissed, eyes darting anxiously. She apologized for the secrecy but said she was under a strict gag order and couldn't reveal the client's name or the details. This isn't about infidelity, she insisted, but I'm dealing with so much right now. Please just trust me until I can tell you everything. Trust her. Again. My chest felt tight, stuck between wanting to support her and feeling betrayed by her half-truths. I nodded numbly. There was a flicker of closeness as she squeezed my hand, yet an unsettling gulf remained. Part of me hoped her explanation was genuine. Another part feared I was only seeing the tip of an iceberg, one that might crash into us any day. That night, I dreamed about the wrapper again. It taunted me, a silent accusation. In the dream, it was bigger, impossibly large, looming over our apartment like a specter. No matter how many questions I asked, the wrapper just kept growing, overshadowing everything. When I jolted awake, the sheets were twisted around me, soaked with sweat. Elena slept quietly beside me, oblivious to the nightmares swirling in my mind. I resolved to push further. I needed to figure out how Sandra, the condom wrapper, and Elena's hidden involvement with James's case all tied together. Something still didn't add up. And if I was going to protect our marriage and my own sanity, I had to connect the dots, before they tore us apart for good. Determined to make sense of the puzzle, I decided to talk with Sandra again. But this time, I wanted to approach her, without any accusations. I invited her to lunch at a casual diner, and tried my best to keep the conversation light before easing into the subject. We chatted about her work as a paralegal at the firm. She mentioned how busy they'd been with some high-profile cases. My ears pricked up. Could this be related to Elena's secret? Eventually, I steered the conversation to the night of this blizzard. I hope you don't mind me asking again, I said gently. But can you walk me through exactly what happened when you stayed in Westbridge? Sandra sighed, setting down her fork. I got off work late. The weather was terrible, and Elena texted saying I could crash there. I drove over, barely made it through the snow. I heated up some leftovers, watched TV, then fell asleep. Alone. I swear. Her eyes locked onto mine, sincerity radiating from her gaze. I believed her, but something else nagged at me. Elena told me you might have had a guest. Any idea why she'd say that? Sandra shook her head. Not really, unless she got me mixed up with someone else. Or unless... Her voice trailed off. She looked hesitant, almost conflicted. Look, I don't want to stir up drama, but I noticed Elena has been acting really stressed lately. More than usual. My pulse quickened. Has she said anything to you? Sandra bit her lip. She hinted that she was dealing with old family baggage, specifically our dad. Something about him being involved in some lawsuit that could blow back on the entire firm if it's not handled carefully. She didn't go into detail. Old family baggage. Matthew's past infidelities were no secret but a lawsuit. That might explain why Elena was so secretive about her phone calls with James the investigator. Still, it didn't explain the wrapper. And it didn't explain why Elena lied about Sandra having a guest. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Elena. Emergency at the firm. I'll be home late. Don't wait up. Typical. My frustration mounted as I realized that the more I dug, the more elusive the truth became. After lunch, I thanked Sandra for her honesty. She seemed genuine, and I felt guilty for ever suspecting her. As I left the diner, I realized one place I hadn't really checked was the security system at the Westbridge apartment. We had a simple door camera app on our phones. Typically, it records short clips whenever the door opens. Maybe it held clues. I'd forgotten about it because Elena set it up originally, and I rarely reviewed the footage. If there was any visitor that night, the camera would have caught them. Back at home, I rummaged through old emails until I found the login credentials. I settled at my desk, heart pounding as I accessed the camera's cloud storage. I scanned clips from the blizzard night. Sure enough, I saw Sandra arriving alone, wearing a big coat and carrying groceries. Hours passed in the footage, with no sign of anyone else. She left the next morning, also alone. My heart sank. Sandra was clearly telling the truth. But then I noticed the timestamps for a few days later. Footage from a weekday afternoon. I watched in confusion as Elena appeared on screen with a man by her side. Not James, from what I could tell. This person was older, graying at the temples, wearing a neat suit. They both entered quickly, heads bent as though in serious discussion. They stayed for about an hour, then left together, Elena locking up behind them. A wave of anxiety pulsed through me. Why hadn't she mentioned this visit? It happened about 2 days before I discovered the rapper. My mind churned through possibilities. Could that be a client? If so, why not meet at the firm? Or was it something more personal, like a friend or relative she didn't want me to know about? My stomach twisted with dread. I replayed the clip multiple times, hoping for some detail, but the camera angle showed only their backs. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, I confronted Elena with the footage. She froze, color draining from her face. "How did you get that?" she whispered, voice trembling. I told her I'd remembered the door camera. Without responding, she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. My heart raced, expecting a confession. When she finally spoke, her words came out haltingly. "That was a lawyer from out of town. He's representing my father in a delicate matter. We couldn't meet at the office without raising questions. It's not what you think." Her eyes were shiny with unshed tears. "Then what do I think, Elena?" I said, my frustration boiling over. "I've been left in the dark while you have secret meetings in our apartment. Meanwhile, I'm the one finding condom wrappers." She swallowed hard. "I didn't want to drag you into this. My dad's case. It's messy. If it goes wrong, the entire firm could implode. My career could be destroyed too. I lied about Sandra because I panicked. I couldn't reveal the truth. I'm sorry." My anger clashed with a surge of pity. I believed she was under immense pressure. But a dozen questions still flew through my mind, all circling back to the same issue. Where did the wrapper come from? Elena insisted she knew nothing about it. She reached for my hand, tears spilling now. "I'm telling you everything else, I swear." I exhaled, feeling cornered by compassion and suspicion. "If you're telling me everything, then who left that wrapper?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Could it be something from before we ever got the place? Or maybe someone borrowed the keys without asking me? I'm not sure." Her explanations felt weak, but for the moment, I was too drained to fight. We spent the rest of the evening in a morose calm, both of us tiptoeing around each other's emotions. In bed, Elena curled up beside me, quietly sobbing. I wrapped an arm around her, uncertain whether to feel comforted by the closeness or haunted by all the secrets. Over the next couple of days, I tried to focus on Sophie and my work, but the tension in our home was stifling. Every ring of Elena's phone, every message that popped up, I found myself bracing for more unsettling news. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake the image of Elena and that older man entering the apartment. If she was telling the truth about him being a lawyer for her father, that still didn't explain the wrapper. Had someone else used the apartment around that time? Out of sheer desperation, I called my friend Neil again. I laid out the new discoveries and Elena's claims. "It's possible she's genuinely in a crisis," he said, "and the wrapper is just some bizarre coincidence." I appreciated his optimism, but it felt too convenient. Coincidences rarely blow up your life this badly. Despite everything, Elena and I weren't ready to give up on our marriage. We tiptoed toward a shaky peace, each of us longing for the comfort we once took for granted. But I sensed a new crisis looming, something that would either break us apart or force the truth into the open. The calm before the storm felt suffocating. By the end of that week, I felt like I was living in a pressure cooker. Elena was on edge, restless and tight-lipped about her father's legal troubles. Sandra seemed worried too, glancing at Elena with concern whenever we saw her. And I was drowning in questions, powerless to find the final piece of the puzzle that might set us free, or confirm my worst fears. I could only pray that the confrontation ahead would finally rip the secrets into the light. The following Monday, everything changed. I woke up to find Elena pacing the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone was frantic. When she hung up, she looked at me with wild, fearful eyes. "My father's been arrested," she choked out. "Financial crimes. It's all over the news." A dizzying wave of shock slammed into me. Matthew, arrested? Despite his past infidelities, I'd never imagined him facing public scandal. My mind spun as I tried to piece everything together. Elena, still trembling, explained that the out-of-town lawyer was negotiating with prosecutors, but it fell apart. They suspected Matthew of a massive fraud scheme within the firm. Elena had been trying to manage the fallout behind the scenes. Suddenly, her secrecy made a twisted kind of sense. If the entire firm was implicated, Elena could lose her career. Christine's reputation would be ruined, and Sandra's future at the practice might be in jeopardy. "I was trying to protect my family," Elena whispered, voice quivering. "I didn't mean to shut you out, but I couldn't see a way to tell you without risking everything." I gently wrapped my arms around her, feeling torn between empathy and residual distrust. "I wish you would have trusted me," I said quietly. "We're supposed to be in this together. Now I'm finding out with the rest of the world." She buried her face against my shoulders, sobbing. For a moment, the intensity of the situation overshadowed the condom wrapper mystery. How trivial it seemed next to a looming legal disaster. But that uneasy question still lurked. If she wasn't cheating, and if the wrapper wasn't Sandra's, who was responsible? Within hours, the media swarmed the law firm. News vans lined the street, reporters clamoring for a statement from the prestigious family of attorneys caught up in alleged fraud. Elena left to handle damage control, ignoring my pleas that she shouldn't go into the office in such a state. "I have to," she insisted. "Mom's devastated, and Sandra is panicking. I need to face this head on." All day I watched the TV news, feeling helpless. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and acquaintances who knew I was married to the lawyer's daughter. Each headline was more sensational than the last. Fraud, embezzlement, possible jail time. I could barely breathe under the weight of it all. Sophie, thankfully too young to grasp the crisis, toddled around with her toys, occasionally tugging at my pant leg for attention. That evening, Elena came home looking hollow. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and her shoulders drooped as though carrying the weight of the world. Without a word, she collapsed onto the couch. I sat beside her, quietly waiting for some update. She spoke in a monotone. "They're holding my dad without bail for now. Christine is talking to every contact she has, but it might be a lost cause." She paused, eyes welling up again. "I'm sorry for everything. The secrets, the lies. I thought if I could just fix this, you'd never have to know." My chest ached with sympathy. Whatever anger I still harbored was overshadowed by the realization that Elena was deeply trapped in her family's mess. I placed a hand on her back, rubbing gently. "We'll figure it out," I murmured. "Together." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "There's still one thing, though," she whispered, voice trembling. My heart rate spiked, anticipating more bad news. "The condom wrapper. I found something this morning." I froze. She stood, rummaging in her purse until she pulled out a small piece of notepaper. It was a typed message, unmarked and unsigned. "Meet me at Westbridge apartment tomorrow night, or I talk." My skin prickled. Elena explained that the note had been slipped under her office door. She suspected it was connected to the firm's implosion. "I don't know who sent it, but they clearly want to meet secretly. Maybe they planted the condom wrapper to frame me for something, or to blackmail me." I'm so confused, my mind spun. If this was blackmail, it might explain the wrapper as a setup. But who would do that? A disgruntled co-worker? A rival attorney? Someone trying to pressure Elena using her father's arrest as leverage? The possibilities were endless. My initial fear, that she was having an affair, melted into a deeper dread. We were dealing with a threat we didn't fully understand. Despite her exhaustion, Elena insisted on going to Westbridge the next evening to confront whoever left the note. "This could be our only chance to clear my name," she argued. "If they have information on my father, maybe we can save him and the firm." The thought of her going alone to meet some shadowy figure terrified me. "We'll both go," I said firmly. She looked hesitant. "I can't put you in danger," but I refused to back down. The next day felt like an eternity. Elena and I barely spoke, each lost in our own anxious thoughts. I tried to keep the day normal for Sophie, playing with her and reading her favorite storybooks, but my mind kept drifting to that ominous meeting. By sunset, my nerves were frayed. Elena, pale but resolute, grabbed her keys. We drove to Westbridge, hearts pounding. Darkness cloaked the parking lot outside the apartment. A single street lamp buzzed overhead, casting a flickering glow. We stepped inside, every sound magnified by our tension. Elena flicked on the living room light. It felt surreal to stand in the same space where I'd first discovered the condom wrapper, now overshadowed by an even larger threat. For a while, nobody came. We waited, the clock on the wall ticking loudly, each second stretching into an hour. Elena paced back and forth while I kept an eye on the door. Finally, at 9:30, we heard the doorknob rattle. My heart leapt into my throat. I braced myself for anyone, a furious coworker, a journalist, or some stranger with a vendetta. The door creaked open, and to our astonishment, Christine stepped inside, Elena's mother looking harried, breath unsteady. She froze when she saw both of us waiting. "Mom?" Elena gasped, voice quaking. "What are you doing here?" Christine's expression wavered between relief and panic. She closed the door, behind her. "I'm sorry," she managed, voice breaking. "I had to get you here without alerting anyone at the firm. I left that note under your door, Elena." My mind reeled. Christine was the one behind the cryptic message? "You wrote the blackmail note?" I asked, incredulous. She shook her head vigorously. No, it wasn't blackmail. I just knew you'd come if it sounded urgent. Elena, I need to show you something. Something that might clear your father's name, or at least reduce his sentence. But it can't be traced back to me. Not yet." Elena and I exchanged stunned glances. Christine rummaged in her handbag, pulling out a flash drive. "This has records, emails, everything. Your father was framed by someone inside the firm. We can't trust anyone else there. But we can't do this in public either. The stakes are too high." My pulse hammered. This changed everything. If Matthew was innocent of at least some charges, then the entire scandal might be a setup. But who inside the firm would do that? And why? Suddenly, the swirl of secrets became even more treacherous. I thought back to the condom wrapper. Had it been part of the same sabotage? The stakes were no longer just about our marriage. We were standing on the edge of a conspiracy far bigger than I'd imagined. Christine's revelation hung in the air. She handed the flash drive to Elena, her eyes pleading. "This might help your father, but we have to be smart about how we use it. We can't trust anyone at the office, not even longtime partners. Someone planted evidence to implicate Matthew. That person might be capable of worse if they feel cornered." Elena stared at the flash drive with trembling hands. "Who could do this?" she whispered. "Dad's not perfect, but he wouldn't commit fraud. I knew he was reckless in his personal life, but I never thought he'd be framed for a crime." Christine's gaze flicked to me. She seemed torn about something. Finally, she spoke in a low voice. "I suspect Daniel Bryce, one of the senior partners. He's always coveted control of the firm. When your father refused to step down, I believe Daniel orchestrated this entire plot." She exhaled shakily. "But I can't prove it alone." I stepped forward, confusion roiling my mind. "Wait, so where does the condom wrapper fit in? Was that also Daniel's doing?" Christine's face clouded. "I don't know about any condom wrapper. That might be unrelated. Or maybe someone wanted to stir up personal drama to keep you distracted, Elena. If your marriage was in chaos, you wouldn't notice the bigger conspiracy." She looked at us apologetically. "I wish I knew for sure." The tension in the room thickened. Elena clenched her jaw. "So, you lured me here with that cryptic note because you couldn't risk telling me this at home or at the firm?" Christine nodded. "I'm sorry for the deception, but I knew you'd come if you thought it was urgent. And you'd come alone. I didn't expect both of you." She gave me a timid glance, then continued. "Time is running out. If we don't act, Matthew could face charges he doesn't deserve." My thoughts spiraled. A part of me was relieved that the wrapper might have been some kind of diversion. Another part felt furious that Elena and I had been torn apart by a carefully placed shred of evidence that might mean nothing more than sabotage. Still, there was no confirmation of who put it there. I remembered Elena's vow that she wasn't cheating. My chest tightened with both relief and lingering doubts. Elena let out a shaky breath. "So what do we do with this?" She waved the flash drive. Christine's voice hardened. "We go to James Holloway. He's the investigator you've been working with. If anyone can discreetly analyze this data and build a case against Daniel, it's him. We just need to be very careful," I chimed in. "James mentioned attorney-client privilege. He might handle this quietly. But Daniel will fight back viciously if he senses we're onto him." Christine nodded. "Exactly. That's why we can't leak this yet. We gather more proof. Then we approach the authorities on our terms." Elena's shoulders sagged, as though a heavy burden had been lifted and replaced with another. She turned to me, eyes searching mine. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I've put you through so much. You thought I was betraying you. And all along I was just drowning in secrets I couldn't share." Emotions swelled in my chest. "I was terrified," I admitted, voice thick. "I found that rapper and assumed the worst. Then the phone calls, the lies about Sandra. It all looked so damning." She wrapped her arms around me in a desperate hug. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was just trying to protect everyone. Mom, Dad, the firm, and you." For a moment, the weight of suspicion fell away, replaced by a fragile sense of unity. Christine quietly slipped into the background, giving us space. Outside the window, the city lights of Westbridge twinkled, oblivious to the drama unfolding in our apartment. Eventually, I pulled back, remembering the flash drive. "We need to do this now," I said, turning to Christine. "Any delay could tip Daniel off. Let's call James and set up a meeting. Tonight, if possible." Elena agreed. Her determination rekindled. She dialed James, explaining we had urgent evidence that needed review. He agreed to meet us at a discreet location, a small conference room he sometimes rented for private consultations. Before we left, Christine put a hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for sticking by Elena. We'll get to the bottom of everything, including that rapper." Not long after, we arrived at a nondescript office building downtown. The place was nearly empty, just a single security guard reading a magazine, under buzzing fluorescent lights. James greeted us in a cramped conference room, his brow furrowed with concern. Elena handed him the flash drive, and Christine recounted her suspicions about Daniel Bryce. James plugged the device into his laptop. Minutes ticked by as he clicked through folders, scanning PDFs, emails, transaction records. Occasionally he muttered under his breath. Finally, he looked up, eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and anger. "There's a treasure trove here. Dated emails, hidden ledgers that point directly to accounts controlled by Daniel. This strongly suggests he framed Matthew." Christine exhaled with relief, while Elena sagged against the wall, tears of gratitude in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of hope. We might actually clear Matthew's name, or at least prove he wasn't the primary culprit. But as we soaked in this victory, James's expression darkened. "We have to be extremely cautious," he said. "Daniel's not just going to roll over. He may have eyes everywhere, and if he suspects we have this, he could escalate." I immediately thought of the condom wrapper. "Escalate how?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "Smear campaigns, harassment, or worse," James replied. "He could try to discredit or intimidate Elena, make it look like she's personally involved in unethical conduct. That might include planting false evidence in places you own." My mind flashed back to the memory of that tiny foil in the trash bin. Could that have been the start of a smear? If the blackmailer or saboteur wanted to throw me off, making me suspect Elena was cheating would certainly unravel our stability. Breaking our trust could keep us too distracted to see the bigger scheme. Elena rubbed her temples, looking overwhelmed. "So someone planted the wrapper to drive a wedge between us, and I fell for it, forcing me to spin lies about Sandra to cover up the real issue." Her voice trembled with anger. "All because Daniel wants to take over the firm?" James nodded, grimly. "It's a classic tactic. Sow chaos in your private life so you're too busy to notice the bigger conspiracy. If we're right, the rapper and any other manipulations won't stop until Daniel gets what he wants, or until we stop him first." Christine's hands shook. "We have enough evidence to go to the district attorney, but we need to time this perfectly." A sudden wave of determination surged within me. For weeks I'd been consumed by jealousy and suspicion, convinced Elena was cheating. Now I saw how cunningly we'd been played. I turned to my wife, heart aching for the pain she'd endured alone. "We won't let him tear us apart," I said softly. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, nodding. James shut his laptop. "I'll start the process tonight. We'll coordinate with a trustworthy ADA. We'll keep your identities out of this as long as possible. But be careful. Watch for any more attempts to create chaos in your personal life." We left the building as a solemn group, Christine heading home to finalize a plan for handling the media, James staying behind to secure the data. Elena and I drove back in tense silence, still shocked by the night's revelations. At a stoplight, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears tracing down her cheeks once more. I squeezed back, voice catching in my throat. "Let's put everything on the table now. No more secrets between us. We face this together." Back at our house, we found Sophie sound asleep, my friend Neil having kindly agreed to babysit last minute. Exhausted, Elena and I collapsed onto the couch. The question of the condom wrappers still hovered, but now with a new perspective. We were pawns in a bigger game, and Daniel or his cronies might have planted that vile clue to keep us distracted. In a quiet moment, Elena laid her head on my shoulder. "You believe me now, right?" she asked, eyes searching mine. I nodded, tears of my own threatening to spill. "I do, and I'm sorry for doubting you, but if we're going to be okay, we have to rebuild our trust," she sniffled. "I know, but tonight was a start, wasn't it?" I leaned in and kissed her forehead. "Yes," I whispered. "It's a start." A few days later, fresh headlines shook the legal world. Daniel Bryce was arrested on suspicion of fraud and conspiracy, thanks to new evidence delivered to the district attorney's office. Matthew was released on bail, with charges pending re-examination. The media storm raged, but behind closed doors, Elena and I felt a glimmer of relief. Together, we had prevailed against a cunning scheme that nearly destroyed us. In the aftermath, we finally got our answer about the condom wrapper. An associate at the firm confessed that Daniel had asked him to plant incriminating personal items at the Westbridge apartment. Their aim was to fracture Elena's home life, ensuring she'd be too distracted to uncover the real fraud. The confession felt like a punch to the gut, and a strange kind of vindication. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but at least the specter of infidelity was put to rest. Standing in the living room one evening, Elena and I stared at the place where I'd first found that wretched wrapper. A wave of emotions coursed through me. Anger at being manipulated, sorrow for the pain we'd both endured, and gratitude that we'd emerged stronger. Elena slipped her hand into mine, her gaze steady. "It's over," she said softly. "Now, we can really heal." I nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to uncover every last secret, even the ones that hurt the most. We would have scars, no doubt, but we had each other. And finally, the truth. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought, or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.